You think you've seen crazy neighbors, until one decides your ranch is her personal playground. Picture this, a self-appointed queen of the HOA clipboard. In one hand, bolt cutters in the other, creeping up my driveway like she owns the place. She thought she was clever, tampering with the locks on my barn, convinced she could inspect my property for imaginary violations. But what she didn't know, I had upgraded my security system. The moment she twisted that handle, alarms screamed, red strobes lit up like a nightclub, and steel doors sealed behind her. Suddenly, Karen wasn't patrolling, she was trapped. Panicked, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, shrieking that she'd been kidnapped. From my porch, watching through the cameras, I nearly spilled my coffee laughing. She wanted control. Instead, she got locked inside my ranch like a trespasser in her own bad sitcom. Before we dive into the madness, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing how far these HOA stories travel. Life on a ranch is supposed to be simple. That's why I bought mine in the first place. Out here, the days have their own rhythm. The mornings start with the crow of a stubborn rooster who seems to think he's auditioning for America's Got Talent, followed by the steady sound of horses snorting in their stalls waiting for me to feed them. My dog Buck usually beats me to the barn, barking like he owns the place, chasing shadows he'll never catch. By the time the sun peeks over the horizon, I've already poured my first cup of coffee and pulled on my work gloves. It's the kind of life most people only see on postcards. Wooden fences weathered just enough to look rustic, acres of open field rolling out in waves of green and gold, and the kind of silence you can actually hear. No car horns, no traffic jams. Just wind, grass, and the occasional hawk circling overhead. For years it was peace. For years it was exactly what I wanted, a refuge from the world's noise. But peace doesn't last when you have an HOA lurking nearby. Now let me be clear, my ranch was never part of their jurisdiction. I bought this land fair and square just outside the cookie-cutter subdivision they call Mapleview Estates. Their world is all about manicured lawns, identical shutters, and garage doors painted in approved neutral tones. My world, muddy boots, mismatched paint on the barn, and a freedom they could never understand. And that apparently drove them insane, especially her Karen. Karen wasn't just any board member. She was the board. Or at least that's how she acted. Mid-50s blonde hair that had been bleached within an inch of its life, sunglasses the size of dinner plates, and a permanent sneer carved into her face. She carried her clipboard like it was a weapon armed with violation slips instead of bullets. I swear if the HOA gave out badges, she'd be strutting around with one pinned to her chest. At first, I tried to laugh it off. She sent me a letter reminding me that my fencing appeared inconsistent with neighborhood guidelines. I tossed it in the trash because, again, my ranch wasn't under their authority. A week later, I caught her standing at my gate snapping photos with her phone like she was gathering evidence for the FBI. When I asked her what she thought she was doing, she sniffed and said, "Just documenting potential hazards. For community safety." Community safety, right. Because my rusty gate latch was apparently a terrorist threat to suburban tranquility. The thing about Karen is that she thrived on control. Most people in the neighborhood had rolled over years ago, painting their shutters beige and trimming their grass down to regulation height. But me, I was the anomaly. The rancher next door, who wouldn't bend, wouldn't nod politely, wouldn't apologize for existing. And that to Karen was unforgivable. Her campaign against me escalated quickly. She left notes taped to my fence posts, warning me about unauthorized structures that would be my hay shed. She complained about the odor coming from my barn. Newsflash, Karen horses smell like horses. She even called animal control once, trying to report me for neglect. They came out, took one look at Buck rolling around in the grass, and my horses munching happily on hay, and left laughing. But Karen didn't laugh. She doubled down. Pretty soon she wasn't just taking pictures from the road. She started walking up my driveway, clipboard in hand, scribbling furiously like she was auditing Fort Knox. One afternoon I found her rattling the padlock on my barn, muttering something about non-compliant hardware. When I confronted her, she had the nerve to scold me about following procedures. I remember leaning against the fence post, arms crossed, and saying, "Karen, the only procedure you need to follow is turning around and leaving before I call the real cops." She huffed, clicked her pen shut, and stormed off. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't done. The funny thing about bullies is that they mistake silence for weakness. Because I didn't explode, because I didn't stomp over to her McMansion and pound on her door, she assumed she had the upper hand. She assumed I was going to break eventually like all the others. She was wrong. I come from a long line of stubborn men. My grandfather once spent 6 hours sitting in a lawn chair on his porch just to prove to a nosy neighbor that yes, he could keep his Christmas lights up until March if he damn well pleased. My father was the kind of man who read every contract 3 times underlined in red and never signed until he was absolutely sure he wasn't being taken for a fool. And me, well, I bought a ranch specifically to get away from people like Karen. Did she really think I was going to let her drag me back into her suburban nightmare number? Instead, I waited, I watched, and I started making plans. Because here's the thing, Karen never considered while she was busy scribbling in her little notebook. I was busy upgrading my locks, installing cameras, and wiring up an alarm system designed to wake the dead. Not because I was afraid of her, but because I knew one day her curiosity would get the better of her. One day she'd push too far, and when that day came, I wanted to be ready. Karen didn't slow down after I warned her off my driveway. If anything, my refusal to bow only lit a fire under her. To her, I wasn't just a neighbor, I was a challenge, a crack in the perfect suburban order she'd built around herself. And Karen wasn't the type to let cracks stay cracks. She wanted control, and she was willing to dig her manicured nails into my property until she got it. At first, it was small stuff. A letter from the HOA citing excessive noise. The supposed noise in question. My tractor running at 7 in the morning, on a ranch. Imagine that. Another week I got a violation notice claiming my livestock containment structures didn't match approved architectural standards. That was her fancy way of saying she didn't like the color of my barn. Every notice ended up in the same place, the burn barrel out back where I roasted marshmallows over the ashes of her paperwork. Petty maybe, satisfying, absolutely. But Karen wasn't satisfied watching her notices turn into campfire fuel. She escalated. I started seeing her more often, lingering by my front gate, snapping pictures with her phone, pretending to check her watch whenever I caught her. I'd pull up from town, and there she'd be halfway down my driveway, clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield. She'd mumble something about routine checks before scurrying off. The nerve of that woman. One afternoon I walked out to the barn and noticed the lock on the side door looked off. Not broken, but scratched like someone had jammed something into it. My gut told me everything I needed to know. Sure enough, Buck came bounding over nose in the dirt, barking his head off at the spot. I crouched down and found fragments of metal on the ground, a broken bobby pin. Karen had been trying to pick my lock. I stood there for a long minute, staring at the barn, adrenaline simmering just under my skin. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was amused, amazed even. She actually believed she had the authority to break into private property. The kind of arrogance you can only build up after years of people being too polite or too scared to tell you no. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just wait her out. She wasn't going to stop. Not until I gave her a reason to. So I started planning. First order of business, the locks. I replaced every padlock on my property with high-security models, the kind you'd need an acetylene torch to get through. Then I went a step further. I had a buddy in town, retired electrician, bored out of his skull, help me rig up an electronic locking system on the barn doors. It wasn't just a lock anymore. It was part of a full security setup. Pressure sensors, motion detectors, cameras linked straight to my phone. And the cherry on top. An auto-lock mechanism that could seal the doors from the inside if tampered with. Karen wanted to play detective. I wanted to give her a prison cell. By the time the system was finished, I almost hoped she'd try something. I'd sip my coffee, watch her on the camera feed, and wait for the inevitable meltdown. And of course, she didn't disappoint. One evening I was in the kitchen making dinner when Buck went berserk. He tore across the yard, barking like his tail was on fire. I pulled up the camera feed, and there she was. Karen in broad daylight, crouched by my gate with a wrench. She was rattling the chain like she expected it to pop open if she shook it hard enough. I leaned against the counter, shaking my head. If she got a badge for nosiness, she'd be the sheriff of suburbia, I muttered. She didn't get through the gate that night, but I knew she wasn't done. The next week I came home from town to find her standing right in front of my barn, clipboard in hand, scribbling furiously. She jumped when she saw me, then quickly recovered, plastering on that smug smirk. "I'm just documenting potential safety hazards," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "On my land," I reminded her. "It affects the community," she shot back. That's when I laughed. Loud, long, and hard enough that Buck tilted his head at me like I'd lost my mind. "Karen, the only thing hazardous around here is you." She stormed off, but not before I noticed her eyes flick toward the lock on the barn again. She was obsessed, fixated, like my padlock was the final boss in a video game she couldn't beat. And I'll admit, part of me enjoyed it. Watching her grind her teeth every time she failed, watching her lose sleep over the fact that I simply existed outside her control, it was entertaining. But another part of me knew it was only a matter of time before she went too far. So I doubled down. I set up extra cameras, ones she couldn't see. I ran tests on the alarm system, fine-tuned the sensors, so even the weight of a crow could set them off. And every night I'd sit on the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching the road, waiting. Because Karen wasn't just bold, she was reckless. She'd already rattled my locks, already crept down my driveway, already fabricated half a dozen bogus violation reports. It was only a matter of time before she crossed the line completely. And when she did, I'd be ready. It happened on a Thursday. Funny how the biggest moments in life never wait for the weekends. They sneak up on you in the middle of a work week when you're halfway through your second cup of coffee and thinking about nothing more dramatic than whether to grill chicken or steaks for dinner. The day started like any other. Sun, high cicadas buzzing, Buck stretched out in the shade pretending to nap, while keeping one eye open, always alert. I was fixing a loose hinge on the back gate when my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call, it was the security app tied to my cameras. Motion detected. I pulled the phone from my pocket, expecting to see a rabbit or maybe one of the neighbor kids chasing a ball too far. Instead, the screen lit up with an image that made me grin. Karen. There she was in broad daylight, waltzing down my driveway like she had an invitation. Clipboard, tucked under one arm, purse, slung across her shoulder, sunglasses perched on her face like she was about to walk a red carpet instead of break the law. I squinted at the screen. She wasn't stopping at the gate this time. No, she marched straight past it toward the barn. My barn. The one she had been itching to get into for weeks. I tapped into the live feed and watched, barely breathing. She glanced around once, just once, before crouching down at the lock. Out came her tools, clumsy but determined. A screwdriver, a pair of pliers, something shiny that might have been a pick. She jammed the screwdriver into the latch, twisting, muttering under her breath. Buck bolted upright, barking his lungs out, but Karen ignored him. She was locked and laser-focused, convinced that if she just jimmied it right, the door would swing open. I shook my head, chuckling. Oh, Karen, you really don't know what you're about to unleash. Because here's the thing, my security system wasn't just a lock, it was an experience. The moment she tampered with that latch, the sensors registered her movements, sending signals to the control panel hidden inside the barn. And when she finally managed to twist the handle just far enough to crack the door open, the system came alive. It started with a sharp click, the kind of sound that makes your stomach drop even if you don't know why. Karen froze, eyes darting around. Then came the siren. A shrill, bone-rattling wail erupted from the walls of the barn, echoing across the ranch like a tornado siren. Buck went ballistic, circling the barn, barking and howling. Red strobe lights flicked on, flashing through the cracks in the walls, bathing everything in pulses of crimson. Karen screamed. Not just a yelp, an all-out, full-throated shriek that could have rattled windows 3 counties over. She dropped her screwdriver, scrambled backward, then lunged at the door to escape. But she didn't know about the auto-lock. The second the system detected tampering, the doors had sealed themselves, heavy bolts sliding into place. From the outside, the barn looked ordinary. From the inside, though, it was a fortress. And Karen, she was the intruder who had just locked herself inside. On my phone, the camera feed shook as she banged on the walls, her sunglasses slipping down her nose, her clipboard abandoned on the dirt. She tugged at the handle, yanking, pulling, kicking, but the steel bolts held firm. I leaned against the fence, phone in hand, laughing so hard I had to wipe tears from my eyes. Well, 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 look who just checked herself into my ranch jail. Karen wasn't laughing, she was panicking. She fumbled in her purse, dragged out her phone, and punched in 3 numbers. 911. I turned up the volume on the feed, curious. Help, she shrieked. I'm trapped. I've been kidnapped. I'm locked inside some kind of facility. Facility. That word alone nearly made me spit my coffee across the yard. She wasn't in a facility. She was in my hay barn, surrounded by feed bags and horse tack, with Buck barking like a lunatic outside. The dispatcher on the line sounded skeptical. Ma'am, where exactly are you? Karen stammered, her words tumbling over each other. On the ranch? I don't know. I was conducting an inspection and the doors locked behind me. Please hurry. Inspection. She really thought she could spin it even while trapped. I shook my head, pocketed my phone, and whistled for Buck. This was better than television. The kind of show you couldn't script if you tried. Minutes ticked by. Karen alternated between pounding on the door and screeching into her phone. The siren still wailed, the red lights still flashed, and she was trapped in the chaos she had created. For me, it was the sweetest kind of justice. For her, it was a nightmare. And the best part, this was only the beginning. Because once the siren stopped and the cops showed up, she was going to learn that her little inspection wasn't just embarrassing, it was criminal. But in that moment, I didn't rush to shut it down. I let the alarm scream. I let her sweat. I let her face the reality she'd been too arrogant to imagine she wasn't in control. Not here. Not on my land. For the first time, Karen had to face the truth. She wasn't the warden. She was the prisoner. You ever watch someone dig their own grave in real time? That's what it felt like standing on my porch with a mug of coffee, while Karen, self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, screamed into her phone like she was starring in a bad soap opera. Through the live feed on my phone, I could see her pacing in the barn, red strobe lights flickering across her pale face, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Her voice was so shrill it cut right through the sirens. "Help, please, I've been kidnapped. The door's locked behind me. He's got me trapped in some kind of bunker." Bunker. I nearly choked. "Lady, you're standing between a bale of hay and a rusty wheelbarrow. The most dangerous thing in that barn is the rake leaning against the wall." The dispatcher's voice crackled through calm professional. "Ma'am, slow down. Where are you exactly? Who locked you inside?" Karen spun around, scanning the barn as if she'd find a sign with my name on it. It's the ranch. "The one at the end of Mapleview. That man, he lives here. He's dangerous. He set this trap for me." Dangerous. Trap. I had to sit down on the porch step laughing so hard. Buck tilted his head and whimpered like he thought I was hurt. "Set a trap," I repeated under my breath. "Karen, the only trap here is the one you walked yourself into." The dispatcher probed gently, probably sensing the holes in her story. "Ma'am, were you invited onto the property?" Karen hesitated. "Just a beat, but long enough to betray her. I was conducting an inspection for the safety of the community." There it was, the infamous inspection. She'd wrapped herself in that excuse so many times, I half expected her to start printing badges for herself. "Okay, officers are en route," the dispatcher said. "Please remain calm. Remain calm." Easier said than done when you're locked in someone else's barn with alarms blaring like the end of the world. Karen shrieked again, rattling the door, kicking at the walls. Dust rained down from the rafters. My horses, safe in the adjacent stalls, whinnied nervously at all the racket. I figured that was my cue. Not to save her, no, I wasn't about to play hero, but to make sure when the police showed up, they didn't buy into her victim act. So I picked up my phone, scrolled to the local sheriff's department, and dialed. "Sheriff's office, what's your emergency?" I grinned. "Not my emergency, yours. You're about to get a call from a woman named Karen. Claims she's been kidnapped on my ranch. Just so you know, she trespassed, tampered with my locks, and my security system did exactly what it was supposed to do." The deputy on the other end chuckled. "Name, I gave it. Address, I gave that too." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "Oh, you're the guy with the place outside Mapleview. Yeah, we know her." That made me laugh all over again. "You don't say." "Sit tight," the deputy said. "We'll send units." I hung up, leaned back in my chair, and enjoyed the show. Inside the barn, Karen was still on the line with dispatch. "He's watching me, I can feel it. He's probably got cameras. Oh my God, he's probably laughing right now. She wasn't wrong." I could have released her with a tap on my phone, deactivated the system, let her slink away before the police came. But why would I? She'd spent weeks harassing me, weeks snapping pictures, sending fake violation letters, even trying to pick my locks. This wasn't cruelty, it was accountability. She wanted to play cop, so I gave her the full perp experience. Alarms, flashing lights, locked doors, and now law enforcement inbound. Minutes stretched on. Buck eventually tired himself out, plopped down on the grass, tongue lolling. I sipped my coffee, savoring the bitter warmth, feeling like a man who'd just won the neighborhood lottery. Finally, through the camera feed, I heard sirens in the distance, real ones this time. Karen froze mid-rant, her eyes wide, hair, frazzled sweat beading on her forehead. She scurried back to the door, pressing her face against the crack like she was waiting to be rescued from a burning building. "Over here," she shrieked, muffled by the steel. "Help me, I'm trapped." Red and blue lights washed across the yard. 2 squad cars pulled up gravel, crunching under their tires. I walked down the steps calm as Sunday morning hands in my pockets. The deputies climbed out, adjusting their belts, eyes flicking between me and the barn where Karen's silhouette flailed behind the door. One of them, a tall man with a sunburned face, smirked. "So this, the situation?" I nodded. "That's the situation. From inside, he locked me in. Arrest him, he's crazy." The deputy raised an eyebrow. "You want to tell me what happened?" "Happy to," I said. "She trespassed, tampered with my lock, triggered my security system, and trapped herself inside. I've got the whole thing on camera. Want me to play it back?" The other deputy chuckled, shaking his head. "Figures. She's been calling us every other week about something. Always someone else's fault." Karen pounded on the door again. "Don't listen to him. He's lying. I was performing an inspection." "Inspection," the tall deputy muttered, shooting me a look. I spread my hands. On private property she doesn't own, doesn't manage, and doesn't belong to her HOA. The deputy sighed. Yeah, that checks out. He walked to the barn, slid a key card, I handed him into the panel, and released the auto lock. The sirens died. The red lights stopped flashing. Silence rolled across the yard, broken only by Karen stumbling out wild-eyed, clutching her purse like it was a life preserver. She pointed at me, trembling with rage. Arrest him, he kidnapped me. The deputy didn't even blink. Ma'am, you're the one who broke into his property. Her jaw dropped. I was trying to what I cut in, smiling. Inspect my hay bales, check my grain supply. Make sure my rake was HOA approved. Even the deputy cracked a grin. Karen sputtered words, failing her for once. She looked around desperately, as if hoping the ground would swallow her whole, but it didn't. Instead, she was standing there, mascara, smeared hair, frizzed, and her reputation circling the drain, while two deputies took notes. And me, I leaned against the porch railing, sipping what was left of my coffee, feeling like the universe had finally evened the score. Because in that moment, it didn't matter how many clipboards she waved, how many fake violations she wrote, or how many neighbors she'd bullied. Karen wasn't in control anymore. I was. There's a special kind of silence that comes right after chaos. The alarms had stopped, the lights had gone dark, and Karen stood outside my barn shaking like she'd just seen the devil himself. Mascara streaks down her cheeks, hair sticking out in every direction, clutching her purse as though it held the Constitution inside. The deputies weren't rushing to slap cuffs on me, which clearly wasn't the ending Karen expected. She blinked, looked from them to me, and back again, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. For once her words failed her. But then, oh then, the performance began. This man, she wailed, pointing a trembling finger at me, he's dangerous. He locked me in there. He tried to humiliate me in front of the entire community. The taller deputy rubbed his temple. Ma'am, we've already established you entered without permission. That's trespassing. Karen gasped like he'd just accused her of robbing a bank. Trespassing. No, I was performing a community service. That barn is unsafe. Those locks are illegal. I was protecting the neighborhood. I folded my arms, smirking. Illegal locks. That's a new one. Maybe you should call the Department of Barn Compliance. The shorter deputy chuckled under his breath, quickly covering it with a cough. Karen spun on me, face twisted with fury. You think this is funny? You endangered me? No, I said calmly. You endangered yourself. My security system works exactly as designed. It doesn't care about clipboards, fake authority, or hair bleach. It just does its job. You broke in. It locked you in. Actions meet consequences. By now the commotion had drawn a crowd. Neighbors from Mapleview started gathering at the end of my driveway, curious eyes peering over shoulders. Word travels fast in suburbia, faster than wildfire, faster than gossip at a church potluck. Within minutes, there were at least 20 people standing there whispering, pointing, some holding up their phones to record. Karen saw them, and that was when the second performance began. She straightened, wiped her smeared makeup with the back of her hand, and raised her voice, projecting like she was in a courtroom drama. I did this for all of you, to keep you safe, to make sure this man wasn't endangering our children, our families, our community. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but it wasn't supportive. If anything, it sounded amused. One neighbor, a guy named Frank who lived 3 houses down from Karen, called out, safe from what Karen, his hay bales. Laughter broke out. Karen's face went crimson. From violations, she snapped. From hazards, from his refusal to follow the rules we all agreed to live by. That was my cue. I stepped forward, calm, deliberate, every word sharp enough to cut. Except I didn't agree, Karen. My ranch isn't part of your HOA. It never has been. I'm outside your jurisdiction, your bylaws, and your petty little rules about grass length and mailbox paint. You've been trespassing, harassing, and now tampering with private property. That's not enforcement, that's obsession. The crowd murmured again, louder this time. Phones were definitely recording. Karen's eyes darted left and right, desperation creeping into her voice. He's lying, he's dangerous, you've all been brainwashed. The taller deputy cut her off. Ma'am, that's enough. We've got the footage, we've got witnesses. Unless you want to escalate this into an arrest, I suggest you calm down. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen froze her chest, heaving eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked small, deflated, like the air had been let out of her balloon of authority. But of course, she couldn't leave it there. Karen never knew when to stop. This isn't over, she shrieked, pointing at me like she was casting a curse. You'll regret this. I'll take this to the board, to the county, to the state. You can't treat me this way. I tilted my head, grinning. Karen, the only thing you're taking is an L. And from the looks of it, half the neighborhood's filming it. Phones lowered as neighbors chuckled, some openly, some behind their hands. Frank called out again. "Guess we know who the real hazard is, huh?" The deputies exchanged a look, then began writing up their report. Karen tried to hover, craning her neck to read what they were jotting down, but they blocked her with a subtle shift of their shoulders. Meanwhile, Buck trotted up, tail wagging, and sat by my side like the good boy he island. One of the kids from the crowd pointed, giggling. Even the dogs laughing at her. The crowd erupted. Karen's face turned the shade of a ripe tomato. In that moment, everything shifted. The queen of the HOA, the tyrant who had bullied half the subdivision into submission, stood exposed, vulnerable, laughable. And she knew it. She stormed back toward the road, muttering about lawsuits, appeals, corruption. The deputies followed at a distance, still scribbling in their notebooks. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, whispers and laughter trailing her all the way. I stood there, arms crossed, soaking it in. Not out of cruelty, but out of justice. Because for weeks, she'd made my life a circus. And now, the spotlight had swung around, and she was the clown. When the deputies finally left, warning her one last time about trespassing charges, the neighbors lingered. A few came up, shaking my hand, clapping me on the back. About time someone stood up to her, one said. "You're a legend," another added. I just smiled, tipping my hat. Didn't do much. Just let her trap herself. And that was the truth. I hadn't schemed, hadn't laid bait, hadn't tricked her. I'd simply protected my property, and her arrogance had done the rest. Still, deep down I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the kind of woman to accept humiliation gracefully. She'd lick her wounds, plot, and come back swinging. But that night, as I sat on the porch with Buck at my feet and a fresh cup of coffee in my hand, I allowed myself a victory. Because for the first time in a long while, Karen wasn't the one in control. The whole neighborhood had seen it. And that was a power no clipboard could take away. The next few days were quieter than usual around the ranch. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet where you know something's brewing but no one wants to say it out loud. Buck lounged in the yard like nothing happened, the horses went about their business, and I pretended not to notice the way cars slowed down when they passed my property. People were talking, people were curious, and Karen had vanished. Well, vanished from public view at least. I knew better. Karen was many things, loud, controlling, arrogant, but she wasn't the type to slink away in defeat. No, she was regrouping, licking her wounds, crafting some grand scheme to spin the disaster of Barngate into a story where she came out the hero. Except this time she was running out of believers. By Monday morning, I was at the feed store in town when Frank, my neighbor from down the road, spotted me. He strolled over grinning like a cat that had raided the cream. "You should have seen the HOA board meeting last night," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Why did they finally vote to outlaw dandelions?" he snorted. "Better. Karen tried to rally the board against you. Stood up waving papers, ranting about illegal locks and community safety. Problem was, half the neighborhood had your video by then. Folks watched her get stuck in that barn from 3 different angles. By the time she got halfway through her speech, the room was laughing. I chuckled, shaking my head. And what did the board do? They shut her down. Told her she embarrassed the HOA, made them look like fools. Said if she kept it up, they'd consider removing her from the board entirely. That made me pause. Karen dethroned from her plastic HOA throne. It almost sounded too good to be true. Frank leaned closer. "You didn't hear this from me, but the board president. He called her a liability, right there in front of everyone." I whistled low. A liability. That was HOA speak for dead weight. On the drive back, I couldn't stop smiling. Not because I wanted Karen destroyed, though, let's be honest, I wasn't crying about it either, but because the tide had finally turned. For years she'd bullied, intimidated, and steamrolled anyone who dared cross her. Now the cracks were showing. And it only got worse for her. Later that week, a sheriff's deputy paid me a visit. Not the tall one from the incident, another guy. He knocked on my door, hat in hand, polite as Sunday morning. "Sir," he said, "just wanted to let you know we've wrapped up the report on that trespassing incident." I nodded. And we're forwarding charges to the county prosecutor. Criminal trespass, attempted tampering, misuse of emergency services. I raised my brows. Misuse of emergency services. The deputy cracked a grin. Turns out, calling 911 because you locked yourself in someone else's barn doesn't qualify as a kidnapping. I laughed so hard Buck started barking as if joining in. Karen was officially in hot water. But the fallout didn't stop with the law. Socially, she was radioactive. Everywhere she went, whispers followed. At the grocery store, people pointed. At the HOA park, kids mocked her with fake siren noises. One teenager even put up a meme online, Karen's face mid-scream under the caption, "Breaking and Entering HOA Edition." It spread through the community Facebook page like wildfire before the moderators finally deleted it. Karen tried to fight back. She sent out a long-winded email to the entire subdivision, painting herself as a victim of male aggression and dangerous rural non-compliance. Problem was, she attached the wrong file. Instead of her carefully edited speech, she sent the raw video from her own phone, screaming, panicking, clawing at the door. It was comedy gold. By then, even her allies were backing away. The HOA president issued a formal statement apologizing for any overreach and clarifying that my property was in fact not under HOA jurisdiction. Imagine that after months of denial, they finally admitted the obvious. I won't lie, it felt good. Vindicating, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But more than that, it was satisfying to see justice working without me lifting a finger. I didn't sue. I didn't retaliate. I just set boundaries, and Karen tripped over them face first. Neighbors I barely knew stopped by to shake my hand. Thanks for standing up to her, one woman told me, her voice heavy with relief. She's been making our lives miserable for years. Another man confessed, I repainted my shutters 3 times because she kept sending me notices. 3 times. My wife nearly left me over it. Seeing her get what she deserves. Best thing that's happened around here in a decade. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just my victory. It was the neighborhood's. Karen had ruled through fear, and the moment someone pushed back, the spell broke. People realized they didn't have to live under her thumb. But the best consequence, the look on Karen's face whenever she drove past my ranch. She'd slow down, glare through her oversized sunglasses, lips pursed so tight they turned white. She never stopped, never got out, but I could feel the fury radiating from her SUV like heat off asphalt, and I just waved. Big, cheerful waves like I was greeting an old friend. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't fireworks or lawsuits. It's watching your enemy stew in the mess they made powerless to fix it. Karen had wanted to control me. Instead, she lost control of everything, her authority, her reputation, her place in the HOA. And I hadn't lifted a finger. Well, except to install a few locks. The funny thing about battles like this is how they end. Not with explosions, not with grand speeches, but with a slow, almost anticlimactic fizzle. After weeks of chaos, alarms, cops, and HOA drama, the dust settled. Karen stopped knocking on my gate. The violation slips stopped showing up in my mailbox. The steady trickle of HOA letters dried up completely. For the first time in months, my ranch was mine again. I remember sitting on the porch one evening, the sun sinking low, painting the fields gold. Buck lay at my feet, tail twitching in his sleep, and the horses snorted softly in the barn. The world felt right again. Quiet. Free. The way it was meant to be. But peace wasn't the only thing I got out of the ordeal. There was irony, too. Delicious poetic irony. See, when the county prosecutor got the charges in hand, they didn't throw the book at Karen. She didn't end up in jail. But she didn't walk away either. The judge, bless his sense of humor, sentenced her to community service. 40 hours. Not in an office, not at a food pantry, but outdoors, with livestock. I nearly spit out my coffee when I heard, "Community service cleaning barns." That's right. The same woman who claimed my locks were illegal, who shrieked about unsafe conditions, who tried to pry open my doors like she was Indiana Jones, got assigned to scoop manure out of barns just like mine. When she showed up for her first shift under supervision, of course the whole county knew about it. Word spread fast. And wouldn't you know it, one of the barns on her list was less than half a mile from my ranch. I didn't go gawk. I didn't heckle. But I will admit, I might have taken the scenic route into town that morning. And yes, I might have slowed down just enough to catch a glimpse of her in the distance, standing knee-deep in straw with a pitchfork in hand, grimacing like she'd bitten into a lemon. Karma doesn't always wear a robe or swing a gavel. Sometimes it wears boots and smells faintly of hay. And as for the HOA, they backpedaled hard. The board stripped Karen of her vice chair position. Meetings became civil again. Neighbors spoke up without fear of being steamrolled. For the first time in years, people planted flowers in whatever colors they wanted, left their trash bins out overnight, even put up a few pink flamingos in defiance. Little rebellions, sure, but rebellions nonetheless. Frank dropped by one evening, leaning against my fence post with a grin. "You know you didn't just win for yourself. You won for all of us." I shrugged. Didn't plan on it. Just wanted her off my back. Sometimes, he said, that's all it takes. Life moved on. The ranch went back to its rhythm, coffee, its sunrise feed runs, Buck chasing squirrels. But every so often, I'd catch sight of Karen's SUV creeping past. She never stopped, never yelled, never even rolled down the window. Just drove by silent. And that silence was louder than any siren, because silence meant she'd lost. And I'd won. The story could end there, neatly tied with a bow. But fate had one last laugh left. Months later, I was checking my security cameras, not because of Karen, but because raccoons had been raiding my feed bins. I flipped through the footage and paused. There she was, Karen walking briskly past the edge of my property. Not at my barn, not rattling locks, not clutching her clipboard, just walking. Head down, shoulders tight, as though the weight of her own pride had finally broken her posture. And I realized something: she wasn't the villain anymore. She was just tired, beaten by her own obsession. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about humiliation or punishment or even justice. It's about watching someone finally face themselves, stripped of power, forced to live with the mess they made. For me, that was enough. Because in the end, I didn't need to destroy Karen. She did that herself. All I had to do was lock my doors, sip my coffee, and let karma wear its boots. If there's one thing this entire ordeal taught me, it's this: boundaries matter. Not just the wooden kind around your property, but the invisible kind around your life, your peace, your sanity. People like Karen thrive on testing those boundaries, poking and prodding until they find a crack. And if you let them, they'll keep pushing until you've got nothing left. But the moment you stand firm, calm, steady, unapologetic, you take back control. You don't have to yell. You don't have to stoop to their level. You just have to make it clear: this far, no further. Karen thought she had power because no one challenged her. The truth: her power was an illusion built on fear and compliance. The second someone refused to play along, the illusion shattered. And that's a lesson worth carrying beyond HOA drama. Whether it's a boss who oversteps, a neighbor who bullies, or a so-called friend who manipulates the principle, is the same. Stand your ground. Protect your peace. Respect yourself enough to say no. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is nothing more than let people face the consequences of their own actions. So if you enjoyed this story, drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from and whether you've ever had your own HOA Karen moment. And don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, there are plenty more HOA nightmares and victories where this one came from.